I'm going to be presenting. I'm going to be presenting on some of the preparedness activities that the CitrusWatch project, otherwise known as CT2006 or 0006, I should say, Citrus Industry Biosecurity Preparedness Strategy, is undertaking. So, in terms of preparedness activities that we're involved in, there's predominantly sort of three main parts to it. So, first off, there's a biosecurity plan. This is actually the fourth version of the biosecurity plan. The last version's reasonably old, so this was a bit of a refresh or a review. There's also a series of what we're calling national surveillance protocols, and I'll touch on that in a little while, and fairly detailed host lists for some of our high priority pests that have been identified through the biosecurity plan. So in terms of the biosecurity plan, most people are probably familiar with them, but if you're not, they're basically a list of the threats of an industry. And they also include what we call a biosecurity implementation plan. And that sort of sets out a variety of activities that industry might want to implement to improve its overall biosecurity preparedness and response capabilities. The sort of highest risk threats from the biosecurity planning process are called high priority pests, and they're sort of the top tier exotic pests that we really don't want to get. So when you actually dig into it a little bit, what you see is sort of like what's on the screen here, and this is just a snip from one of the high priority pest lists, where we're trying to capture a bit of information at a high-ish level about the sort of hosts that are affected, what part of the plant is affected, a little bit of information about how the pest is likely to spread, and its current geographic distribution. And we sort of use all of that information as well as a range of research and expert, pathologists, entomologists, and that sort of thing, to rank these threats by their entry potential, their establishment potential, how likely they are to spread, and what their likely economic impact is if they actually established in Australia. And you combine all of those together using a little formula, and we come up with a high priority and overall risk. And the highest overall risk pests become your high priority pest list for the industry. So in the case of citrus, we've got a reasonably large list, and I won't sort of go through this blow by blow, but essentially you've got a number of fruit flies that are mostly in sort of Southeast Asia and stuff like that. So there's a risk of them entering that way, or through trade, or people illegally bringing things in, whatever. There's also a number of psyllid threats, which are significant issues because, well, there's two psyllids, the African Asian citrus psyllid, that are significant threats because of their risk of spreading HLB or Honglongbing. There's also a few other true bugs there, brown marmoret stink bug and glassy wing sharpshooter, which is a risk because of its ability to vector Xylella, which is another one of the high priority pests. We've also got a few moth and caterpillars, which are an issue because these are internal fruit feeders. And then we've got thrips, which again are an issue because of the impact they have on the outside of the fruit. They cause scarring and that sort of thing. We then get to our pathogens. So the top three there are the various strains of Honglongbing. There's an American, an African, and an Asian strain, and the Asian strain's the more significant one economically. But they're all things we don't want. We then have citrus stubborn and citrus canker and Xylella, or citrus variegated chlorosis, which are bacterial diseases, and a couple of mildews and a few viruses as well. And there's a range of sort of lower tier pests as well, but these are the higher priority ones. So since we last reviewed the biosecurity plan, we've had a few changes, mostly relating to the addition of a few extra fruit fly, rind boring moth, the powdery mildew, stink bug, and some of the exotic thrips. We've removed a few of the fruit flies and a few of the one of the thrips, and that's more just sort of moving around what the overall risk is. So there's still things that have fallen off the list are still significant pests. They're just not quite as significant an impact as some of the other pests. So that's why we've moved things around a little bit. But generally speaking, the list has stayed fairly much the same, with the top sort of pests being the psyllids and HLB and canker and stuff like that. So that brings us on to the second part of the project, which is looking at what we call host lists. And what we've been trying to do here is develop a series of fairly detailed, annotated sort of host lists to help everyone in a response better understand what hosts are likely to be impacted by particular pests. So through a literature review, we've tried to provide a bit of commentary around hosts. So we're not just giving a list of hosts and thinking all hosts are equal. We're actually digging into it a little bit to say classify those hosts out a little bit. So we've sort of come up with 4 general classifications, which we're calling natural hosts, which are in this case things that are that the pest is able to reproduce on and complete its entire life cycle if it's an insect. We then have what we're calling conditional hosts, which are sort of plants that an insect, for example, may not be able to complete its entire life cycle on, but it might feed on, for instance. Or we're also using this to capture our experimental hosts. So that's things that there's research papers where they've put a cage over a plant and they've found that the insect will feed on it or whatever, but it hasn't been observed in the field. We then have this category that we're calling regulated articles, which is plants that are sort of associated with the pest as a hitchhiker type situation. But as far as we're aware, the insect isn't actually feeding on them or using them as a reproductive host. And then we've got sort of a questionable host category, which is capturing things that usually to be a taxonomy change or something of that nature, where our understanding of a pest has changed over time. So an old paper might have included a species as being on a host of, I don't know, lettuce or something, and then over time that has been split apart into 2 different species just through improvements in our understanding of the taxonomy. And as a result, those old papers, although might list that species as a host or whatever, is now no longer the case, or doesn't appear to be the case. And we've tried to capture that through this sort of notes column. Yeah, so in terms of the host lists themselves, the project's trying to develop 15 of them over the 5 years or so of the project. We've submitted 7 so far for the Asian citrus-psyllid, African citrus-psyllid, the free strains of HLB, Honglongbing, as well as Malseco. And we've got another 8 in various stages of completion for Rhine borer and citrus fruit borer, false codling moth, which are all high priority pests, bean thrips, stubborn, CVC, so it's citrus variegated chlorosis, which is Zoella, brown-marrow stink bugs in the early stages of development, and there's a glassy wing sharpshooter one as well. And we've got at least one more to do as well. Third part of the project is looking at developing surveillance protocols. So this is a relatively new document. And for some people in the room, they'll be aware of this, others may not. But essentially, they provide guidance around how you would do surveillance for set pests. So in this case, we're looking at Honglongbing, Asian citrus-psyllids, and African citrus-psyllids predominantly. And we're drafting these documents. And the idea is that these will go through what we're calling the Surveillance Protocol Working Group, who are responsible for overseeing this at a national level, and they're sort of a subset of the Subcommittee for National Plant Health Surveillance, sits under PHC or Plant Health Committee. So in those surveillance protocols, we're trying to capture a fair bit of information about hosts. So that's sort of ties in with the host list part of the project. We're also looking at how you actually do surveillance, what sort of traps you might use, what sort of methods you'd use. All of that information is captured in these documents. And the idea is that for either surveillance programs like the CitrusWatch program, or if one of these pests came into the country, we have these documents to help prepare for and know how we would do surveillance. They don't go into the details of saying you have to collect, you know, 600 traps over this area to prove area freedom or whatever. We're not going into that detail. It's sort of that slightly higher level. And you use these documents to then develop those more detailed documents given a particular situation. And then we've got a few other bits of preparedness work that's going on in sort of related projects that I just thought I'd mention just because they're sort of happening at the moment and they're relevant. So there's a PhD project being undertaken by Michael Edwards through AgVic, and they're basically looking at psyllid diversity in and around citrus orchards. So he's started a bit over 12 months ago, and that project's progressing quite nicely. Jess has also been responsible for leading a couple of study tours over to the US, where they've been able to learn a bit about how HLB and psyllids are managed over there. And we're also looking at developing a simulation exercise in the next probably 12, 18 months or so to test the industry's preparedness for exotic pests such as HLB and the psyllids. So that's the main bit of preparedness stuff I wanted to talk about. Another component of the project that I wanted to just touch on fairly briefly is what we're calling risk modelling. This component was actually led by CSER Australia, but I'm going to present today. So I don't have all of the details, but this is essentially how it works. So it's a model for Asian citrus psyllid predominantly, and it's looking at a range of different components of how Australia would be suitable for these pests, where they're likely to enter and that sort of thing to help guide surveillance effort. So we have a climate suitability model, which is looking at where psyllids are overseas and comparing that to Australia's climate for humidity and temperature and stuff like that. We then have a series of pathway models that are looking at both short-term visitors who might be coming from overseas for a holiday, as well as people that might be visiting family and friends. And we sort of see that as potentially a higher risk pathway because there's a bit of an incentive for people to possibly bring, citrus stuff from home or whatever and bring it to their friends and relatives in Australia. There's the returning resident pathway, which again has potential issues where someone might be coming from an Asian citrus psyllid country, bringing with them citrus material for planting or something, and these sorts of things have been detected at the border in the past. We're also looking at sea cargo and natural dispersal pathways from the north, as well as trying to understand how budwood moves around the country a little bit as well. So that's the pathways model, and we use that to get a bit of an estimate of where incursions are likely to happen. And when you map it out, it ends up looking a bit like this. This is obviously zoomed right out, but the big cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, are your higher risk sort of areas. There's also a little bit of risk around the main citrus production regions, partly because of just having suitable climate and a lot of hosts and that sort of thing. So that sort of skewed the model a little bit. We then have an establishment likelihood layer, which is sort of combining the pathways and climate, and it comes out sort of pretty much like the pathway model, where the higher risk areas are the main sort of cities and urban areas around the country. The output of the model itself is it puts out these maps, but it also puts out a list of statistical area 2, which is essentially sort of a postcode type sized area that we can then use to better target surveillance. So you can actually tell it to say where are the highest risk areas in Queensland or New South Wales by statistical area 2s. And we can take that information to then target our surveillance appropriately. So this is just a bit of a picture of how it all sort of zooms down. So this is just Brisbane because I picked Brisbane for some reason. But basically you got your climate suitability and your incursion layer. You then have an establishment likelihood layer, and you overlay them all, and you get to the stage where you can start seeing some of the high risk locations in a city or beyond, and you've got these slider bars and things that you can change where you put your cutoffs and all sorts of things like that. So that, in a nutshell, was the main components of the project from that PHA's been leading. And yeah, if there's any questions, please put it in the chat or send me an email, or yeah, we can get in touch. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll pass on to Jess again.
Oh, thanks, Rowan. Well, that was great. And I'm actually going to invite Ben to share his screen. And Ben is going to be taking us through the surveillance component of CitrusWatch. And he's going to be presenting information on surveillance that's been done both in Northern Australia and Southern Australia. Thanks, Ben. We can see your screen, Ben.
Yep. Oh, that's great. And you can hear me okay?
Yes, it's in editing mode.
Okay. How's that?
Yep, we can see it. Perfect.
All right, great. Thanks for coming, everyone. I won't take up too much of your time, but yeah, I'm here to look at the surveillance component of the CitrusWatch program. I'm pretty much the surveillance and engagement officer for Northern Australia. However, I'll be touching on what happens in Southern Australia as well. Oops. Pardon me. So the CitrusWatch program is basically about the early detection of exotic pests and diseases associated with the citrus industry. There's mainly 6 key targets that we're looking for, and they're all in the top 40 HPPs. So what CitrusWatch has done, we've split the country in half. Essentially, I look after everything above the Tropic of Capricorn, and our Southern Australian colleagues look after below that. We each have a sticky trapping component with the program. So Northern Australia, we put out 400 sticky traps, and Southern Australia put out 600 sticky traps. Obviously, Southern Australia has a lot more citrus and a lot more people, and that's the reason for that. So the sticky trapping forms part of the early detection network, and that's pretty much the main surveillance component of the CitrusWatch program. But what complements that is also targeted surveys for key pests as well, and that's undertaken in both Northern and Southern Australia. So we look at site selection. So for urban, peri-urban landscapes within close proximity to first points of entry is where we think we're more likely to see these exotics coming over the border. So up in, both in Northern and Southern Australia, we look at community gardens, approved arrangements, nurseries, tourist parks. We get schools and universities involved, as well as normal everyday residents. In terms of sticky trapping in commercial areas, you can see basically there a bit of a breakdown of the major growing areas by hectare across Australia. So it's those areas in terms of commercial citrus growing are the areas that will be most likely targeting from a commercial point of view. So what is the EDN? So it's all about the sticky trapping, basically. You volunteer to register to participate online. I send you out a trap kit. You basically build that trap kit and deploy it into your suitable host, which could either be a citrus species or a Murraya species. And then you basically hang it up for 2 weeks, and then you can return the panel in a prepaid envelope. I triage that and then give that to the entomologist to investigate the presence or absence of those exotic pests that we just talked about before. So the kits come with all the components that you need to build the trap. It comes with a scented lure, a pheromone, which smells like citrus, not surprisingly. It's non-toxic. The sticky boards themselves are quite sticky. They're pretty much put into a cage. That cage is meant to sort of protect bycatch like lizards and stuff, or small birds from getting stuck on the sticky board, which doesn't always work, unfortunately. But we're looking at different ways to sort of combat that. So yeah, what's in a trap? You get your panels, you get the lure, a cage, instructional material, and your mailing envelopes. So it's a pretty easy process. There's a My Pest Guide app that is used to record the barcode on the sticky panel, and then that feeds information into the back end of that, where I can see where the trap was deployed, what time, what date, whereabouts geographically, and then I can use that in my data to determine, you know, what traps are going where, basically. So yeah, residents in major cities, urban residents in regional centres, citrus growers, tourism site staff, the list is really endless. So in terms of targeted surveys, both Northern and Southern Australia, it's essentially visual assessments first. So we do a visual assessment, we segment the tree into four pieces and basically study each corner until we've looked at the whole thing. And then we do tap sampling as well. So there is a surveillance protocol, which I'll touch on later. But essentially, if you're doing a commercial orchard with larger amounts of trees, then 20% of those would get tapped. And then we do bud stick collection as well. So 20% would get tapped. So I'd look at 50 trees visually, and then 10 of those would then get tapped, and the same 10 would get bud sticks from. The bud sticks are sent to New South Wales EMAI for analysis, and I'll get onto that as well. One of the other forms of surveillance that we did last year was the bud stick blitz, which is essentially, like it sounds, basically collecting lots of bud sticks from all over Australia. We enlisted the EDN to do that, which was reasonably successful, and that allowed us to gather a lot more data, which can serve as, you know, for data sharing, or just boosts our own data sets and gives industry more peace of mind that we don't have these nasty diseases out in the orchards or in people's backyards for that matter. So we sent out a kit. Again, they got instructions on how to do it and a prepaid satchel to be able to get that straight down to EMI AI for testing. So I talked about the data protocol, the targeted inspection protocol. So essentially this is it. We do the visual inspection techniques. I'm not going to drill right down into exactly how many leaves we look at, but essentially we do visual inspection of a set amount of trees. Of those, we do sampling by basically beating the leaves into a white tray with a little bit of soapy water on the bottom, essentially seeing what falls out. If they're the usual suspects, we don't usually have to worry, but if something looks sus, we'll collect that for analysis. And the bud stick sampling, as I said, you take 4 bud sticks off one tree and we bag those up. They're about 10 centimetres long, and we send them off for testing. And a big shout out to Nerida Donovan and her team who conduct all that testing on our behalf. So the sampling procedure, as I said before, depending on how many trees you're looking at and whether you're on a commercial or a non-commercial property, usually dictates how many trees you're going to be looking at. But that's basically a layout of how many trees you do visual, how many you do tapping, and how many you do bud stick, based on what the size of the property is and whether it's commercial or non-commercial. So this little AgConnect app is something that Southern Australia uses for their targeted surveillance. It allows, it reduces paperwork and potential for error, and the back end, they can get all the data straight into AusPestCheck, which is the central database that's used by Plant Health Australia. We've got data standards, that we follow, and they're always evolving. So I think we're up to version 5 now. But that basically dictates the standard, what mandatory fields and data we need to collect before it gets uploaded. So where does the data go? Into AusPestCheck. So they're the records since June 21 of all the occurrences under the CitrusWatch program. So you can see Queensland clearly takes the lead there. And I think one of the reasons for that is that I think they've got the largest EDN in the country. So I put a call out to QDAF once, and they put some information on their EMAG to try and recruit volunteers for me, and we got a flood, absolute flood from Queensland, and particularly around the Brisbane sort of Sunshine Coast area. We're slowly making up the numbers in the west, but noting, like I said before, population's low, citrus footprint is minimal. However, we're still trying to capture as much as we can over on that side of Australia. Again, just sort of delving down into it, occurrence records by state and pest. Again, Queensland comes out on top. So the reason why I know this is EDN, because the EDN is specifically looking for these three insects, the Asian and African psyllid and the glassy winged sharpshooter. So of those, Queensland clearly is well in front. However, like I said before, that is skewed based on all those volunteers that we got, and we'll slowly make the numbers up elsewhere as time progresses. Okay, just focusing on Northern Australia. So this is sticky trapping across Northern Australia. These records are taken from AustPestCheck. So you can see my remit is 400 sticky traps a year. I do that in 200 lots. So I do early dry season trapping. I like to retrieve 200 traps at least. And similarly in the late dry season, I want 200 back. Now, to get those 400, generally we have to put out 500 or 600 because invariably people go on holiday or they lose interest or the dog ate their trap or what have you. So I try to aim for around an 80% return rate. I think I'm sitting on 84% now, but I'll show you those stats in a little bit. Looking at last year's data, a full year of data, I put out 453 traps. 388 were retrieved and reported through my pest guide. 80% of those were deployed to urban and peri-urban environments. And not all volunteers are comfortable with the app. So we got 86 success rate with using the app, but some people just get a little bit confused with it, or sometimes they're out of range to be able to make it work. So that's all right. Data manual records are important in that regard too. So they've got a little entomology submission form, and that way I'm always getting the name, the location, and the host, and then I can just go onto Google Earth to get the Latin longs. But all that information generally is pumped out on the back end of the My Pest Guide Reporter app if it's used, and that's one of the benefits of using that application. So you can see my remit, Northern Australia. I'm focusing a bit over here in Broome. I've got Kununurra, I've got Darwin and Greater Darwin, we've got Katherine, I've got Central Australia as well as Tea Tree, where there's a little bit of citrus footprint up there. And then obviously the Atherton Tablelands, Cairns and Townsville region. So last year's data again, I had 353 traps assigned. I had 235 returned. I had 79 trappers, and the return rate was only 67. So I've just started. I was still finding my way. So that was round one last year. I came up with a couple of strategies, and by round two, the stats had vastly improved. So I got 218 returns from only deploying 270, and I had 99 trappers and an 81 success rate of returns. Now that's the My Pest Guide Reporter map there. That just sort of shows in the back end what I can see as to how many traps are being deployed using that app. So it's not a true indication of the number of traps out there, but it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a tool to be able to determine where they're being deployed and by what sort of numbers. So looking at round one this year, early dry season, I've put out 292 traps. I've had 245 returns, 94 trappers, and I'm up to around 84% in returned for diagnostics. You can see here a bit of a breakdown around trap deployment across states. This round, not surprisingly, the NT has had more traps deployed. Queensland has dropped off from last year, mainly because I had some colleagues working with Citrus Australia based in Mareeba who were really helpful in enabling me to deploy more traps in that space. WA has improved as well because we've formed sort of a loose sort of partnership with DPIRD, who are going out of their way to help me deploy traps in both urban, peri-urban and commercial areas. So some quick stats. I've got a total of 220 odd volunteers on the books. Obviously, not all of them sign up each season. Numbers of traps are increasing. Distribution of traps is expanding. We've got actually fairly equal numbers in the early detection network between NT and Queensland. Not just this round, that's all. It doesn't really reflect that this round. And WA consistently low due to reasons I've explained. The good thing is the return rates is steadily improving. So we're getting more traps back for less mail outs, which is a good thing. So 80%, around 80% of the traps that I deploy are in urban or peri-urban areas. That's where we consider the high risk to be. And we're trying to focus around those first points of entry where you'll have, airplanes, ships and passengers coming in from international ports. Excuse me. So traps are also deployed in commercial orchards as well. And these are largely set and retrieved by orchardists, myself, and I've sort of teamed up with surveillance officers across various towns and regions and what have you to help assist getting those traps out there, which has been really good. So just a bit of a summary of what sort of targeted surveillance I've been doing in Northern Australia and where I've been doing it. So you can see Northern Australia 22. I've just sort of started at the end of 22. The program had just been kicking off, but you can see there's a few commercial sites there as well as urban, peri-urban sites as well. Slowly improves with 2023. And you can see there, we're getting out wide over the territory into Kununurra and Queensland. And similarly with the urban and the peri-urban stuff, we're not only getting around Darwin and Katherine and other parts of the territory, but also over to Townsville and Cairns and what have you. This is the targeted surveillance that I've done so far this year. Probably the top half of it is stuff that's already been done, and the bottom half is stuff that I plan to do. So again, I'm trying to do a good mix of commercial and urban and peri-urban environments in a range of locations where citrus is prevalent. In Southern Australia, got a series of maps here basically show surveillance in different regions of Southern Australia. Just ignore the Northern Territory one that's in there because it came with a set of slides on the AusPest check. So Queensland focusing around that big port area of Brisbane as well as up the coast there to the Atherton Tablelands and the tourist regions of Cairns and Townsville. We've got east and west Kimberleys covered, as well as southwestern Western Australia. The urban and peri-urban areas of Adelaide, as well as the citrus production areas of the Riverland. Over to Victoria, Melbourne Metro and the Murray Valley. Similarly, Murray Valley in New South Wales and the Riverina. So early detector network in terms of what happens in Southern Australia. They've got 250 volunteers on their database. In 2021, they deployed 353 traps to 41 volunteers, and 185 traps were returned. Conversion rate of 52%. So we've come a long way. So well done to my southern colleagues. They now got 362 traps mailed out to 105 volunteers and 264 traps returned for diagnostics. So their conversion rate is improving. Autumn deployment of traps. So in production areas, clearly, again, Queensland came out on top. So in terms of production areas, there were more traps deployed to Queensland than any other state. And these were in the production regions of Gaynardar and Mundabur. I hope I pronounced those okay. Again, when we look at the urban trapping, again, Brisbane takes the cake for those major ports. So I think my Southern Australian colleagues were saying they want to do a bit more in the space of Adelaide and Perth to try and boost numbers there. So targeted surveys in Southern Australia. So number of sites in Northern Victoria over 23-24, and similarly in Greater Melbourne over 23-24. Predominantly looking at urban and peri-urban sites. However, looking at some production sites too around Perth and Melbourne and Northern Victoria. Been doing a little bit of work too, I think, following some major arterial routes and basically following the traffic, human traffic. So, Northern Victoria, Greater Melbourne, some examples of the types of environments where the surveillance is being undertaken. Okay, so Adelaide, Sydney, Perth, Greater Melbourne, Northern Victoria, Central Victoria. Australia is a really big place. Southern Australia is quite a huge area to cover, but it's great to see that the program is we're really getting into each growing region of Australia, and we're expanding from there. So we've got our first points of entry covered, we've got our growing areas covered, and now we want to start zeroing in and finding the most suitable sites, so try to improve where we're putting our effort essentially. And just again touching on this bud stick blitz. So in 23 discussions with DAF on data sharing via Pest Check, it enabled improved surveillance planning across government and industry, and the use of industry data for market access. So the decision to proceed with the collection of samples for the Ilela testing during spring 23, and that data was shared with DAF to promote market access in the EU. So again, we called upon our EDN volunteers to take these bud stick samples, and they came from far and wide, which is great to see. And another example of citizen science playing its role in biosecurity across Australia. So we've got some acknowledgements here. So I'm not going to read them all out, but I guess from my perspective, I'd like to thank all the volunteers and all like agencies, all the biosecurity agencies that I liaise with. Obviously, all our scientists, our entomologists, our plant pathologists, our molecular scientists, and of course, my team, both at Plant Health Australia and Citrus Australia. And that is it, folks.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's great. I'm going to present the last presentation for the day. It will be quite a quick overview, so we keep to time. But I'm going to present on the engagement, awareness and training activities that we've been doing in CitrusWatch over the last 3 years. And this was going to be presented by Jackie Mitchell, but I'm standing in for her today. So as you've heard so far, the CitrusWatch program is really split into these 3 main areas of preparedness, surveillance, and the education and training component. Here's the team. We have team members at Plant Health Australia, Citrus Australia, NT Government and CSER Australia. The people who are mostly involved in the education and awareness part of the program are myself, Jackie and Ben. And as you've heard so far, we kind of split up our activities a bit. I undertake awareness and education and training with the citrus industry. Jackie Mitchell is our Urban Biosecurity Coordinator, and she mainly focuses her efforts on Southern Australia, where most of the urban centres are. And then Ben focuses his efforts in Northern Australia. But in saying this, there's quite a lot of collaboration that happens between the team members as well. So we work together on different activities too. So I'm just going to begin by speaking a little bit about the engagement in urban areas. So you've heard so far that we run this volunteer-based trapping network called the Early Detector Network in both in Southern Australia and Northern Australia. And the size of the Early Detector Network has grown from really just a handful of people in 2021 to now it fluctuates anywhere between 450 people to 500 people at any one time. So that's quite a large, I guess, network for us to engage. And so far over the last few years of the program, it's been, I guess, our main vehicle for engaging with urban stakeholder groups, and we use it as obviously a volunteer trapping network. And in the first couple of years of the program, the focus was on attracting volunteers to help us with the trapping. But more recently, our efforts have really changed to, yes, asking them to continue to help us with the trapping, but also to value add to the network and to really try and develop the network into more of a community of learning underpinning the Early Detector Network. So really trying to help those people in the network understand why we're doing what we're doing, and getting some champions out of the network as well, so they can tell their family and friends what they're doing with confidence. So in terms of attracting volunteers, that's a big part of the communications that we do. We write articles about the program, we submit them to councils and government newsletters and community garden newsletters. There's a lot of word of mouth that goes on. And until last year, in fact, for the volunteers in the Southern network, most of the volunteers were attracted to the network by word of mouth or direct communications with myself or the Urban Biosecurity Coordinator, but that is starting to change. We're starting to see people read articles, for instance, or see webinars and get in touch with us that way. Ben mentioned he puts an article out each year through the QDAF newsletter. Unfortunately for Ben, a lot of the volunteers that end up opting into the network through that article are the southern part of Queensland, so we take them into our own network. And we do volunteer drives at events. Then the other part of running the volunteer network is retaining volunteers. Anyone who's run a volunteer network would understand that this is quite a big component of it, keeping them interested and involved. We have tried to make sure that during trapping seasons, we send out regular updates, what's going on with the trapping. We've taken feedback from people in the network, how to improve our guidelines to make it as simple as possible for them to go out and put a trap out and send us the information that we need. We're trying to link them with educational resources to make things more interesting for them, such as online training, pest ID resources. We've started running an end of season webinar in autumn and spring as well. So recently we had Daryl Hardy present on control of citrus gore wasp just a few weeks ago, otherwise known as Dr. Buggerlugs, and I'm sure many of you know Daryl. Nerida Donovan has also presented for us in the past, so we're trying to offer that value add to keep them interested and engaged. And we also offer things like prize draws for our volunteers. And we have some collateral that we send out in the trapping kits as well. So you can see there's quite a lot of merchandise here. This picture at the bottom is one of Ben's stores. He's put together some beautiful gift packs so people can learn about the program and take away a little gift with them as well. How do we support our volunteers along the way? Sometimes they do get a little bit confused about how to go about the trapping, especially how to use the app, what information to put in the My Pest Guide Reporter app. So we have these long form trapping instructions that I'm showing on the pictures on the screen here. These are actually shorter than they used to be, but we've tried to summarize them, but provide a good amount of detail that we offer for download on our website. And we also print them out in hard copy and put them in the trapping kits. We've also reduced the size of the instructions to a summarized form that goes as a sticker on the outside of the trapping kit as well. We also offer online training. So if trappers want to learn a little bit more about why we're doing what we're doing, they can get onto the Bolt platform and they can spend 30 minutes learning how to trap psyllids, a little bit about psyllid biology, and more detail about how to put their trap out and why we collect the data that we collect. We also have a how to deploy your trap YouTube video. And every season, Ben, Jackie, and I are available for trappers to call and have a chat to. And we also, we often do get calls from trappers just asking, oh, am I doing it right? Can I put the trap out now? And we just talk them through the process. So what we're also trying to do in the background is build a library of resources. So we have our first fact sheets, a series of fact sheets on different pest species of citrus, exotic pests, that are in draft. You can see an example of the Asian citrus psyllid, a fact sheet on ACP on the right there. And we've just started to translate our fact sheets into a series of languages as well, Thai, Khmer, Mandarin, Indonesian, and Vietnamese. So the idea being we can send these fact sheets out through the EDN, we can offer them on our website, and we can send them to other interested organisations as well. We spend a lot of time out in the field sitting down with stakeholders, talking to them about what we're doing and why. We particularly try to sit down with those organisations that play what we call a knowledge broker role in the community. So there might be zoos or councils or botanic gardens. So any organisation where they might receive questions from the community about pests that are being seen in people's gardens. So you can see here a picture of Ben. He's sitting down, I think he's sitting down with Mareeba Shire Council staff in this picture, just taking them through the program and the intention of the program and trying to get them a little bit involved in terms of helping us put out communications to the wider community, not just to EDN, but also trying to get them involved in trapping or allowing us to come in and survey at their sites as well. So for Southern Australia, one thing that we've been focusing on lately is trying to get local councils involved in that communication aspect of the program. We go to quite a few ag shows and garden festivals as well, just to talk to people about exotic citrus pests and biosecurity in general. And also this helps us attract more volunteers as well. So you can see some pictures of Ben in action on the bottom left here and Jackie in action on the right. We often try and pair these activities and collaborate with the state governments. So recently, Jackie did Perth Garden Festival at the DPIRD stall, Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show with the Agriculture Victoria, and she'll be going to the Queensland Garden Expo in a few weeks, and she'll be sharing that stall with QDAF. So we try and collaborate on that where we can. We also try and work with the education sector. Over the years, the Citrus Australia has run lectures and surveillance practicals with a series of institutions, including Box Hill TAFE and the University of Melbourne, a primary school near in the Port of Melbourne, and also an agricultural high school in South Australia. These are fairly opportunistic sessions. If they ask us, can we come and give a presentation or a prac, we say, that's no problem. And we go and talk to them about exotic pests and biosecurity and surveillance. And Ben is quite proactive, getting out there in the community and talking to students, particularly in Science Week, teaming up with his colleagues at NT Government and talking to them about biosecurity. So you can see a picture here of Ben presenting to some primary school students in the NT. We have an Instagram account. It's still early days. What I'm showing you here, it's just actually some social media plates that are in draft that we aim to release in the next month or so. We are aiming to pick these apart a little bit and simplify them just a little bit. But I just wanted to show you where we're at. We're going to do an exotic citrus pest identification series. We're also talking about doing a campaign on how to grow good citrus, maybe some information on citrus recipes, just to get the local communities or urban communities aware of the program and excited about the program as well. I'm going to fly through the next few slides. I just wanted to mention, in terms of engagement with the citrus industry, we put out a lot of articles and we speak at grower forums around the country about what we're doing. More recently in March, we held a biosecurity symposium. Had 175 people attend, roughly half of them were citrus growers, gained some excellent feedback, and we aim to run this symposium again. The main topic of the symposium was Huanglong Bing. We had international speakers speaking about the impact of HLB in their respective countries. And then we had some domestic staff speaking about what we're doing to prepare for HLB. And I just wanted to show you some feedback in terms of knowledge about HLB before the event. Most people said their knowledge was high or average. After the event, that had changed to the majority of people saying they had a high knowledge, which was great. And in terms of level of knowledge about Australian preparedness and response arrangements, before the event, most had a high or average knowledge. After the event, we had this switch to most having a high knowledge of response and preparedness arrangements, which is excellent. And Rowan also mentioned that we do study tours. So we've held 2 study tours so far. In 2023, we took a bunch of growers to California and Florida to learn about HLB management and control. And more recently, March 2024, we took a group of government personnel and also a representative from the green life industry to California. We attended the HLB conference, and this is a photo of the group out in the field with a surveillance team, a state biosecurity surveillance team looking for HLB. So that was an excellent event. I'm going to finish up just by saying that we're also creating resources for crop scouts and surveillance staff. So if you're interested, please get in touch with us. We have an online module focusing on how to identify exotic psyllid species. We have information guides on identification. And one other thing that we've been doing is we have these Asian citrus psyllids in resin. We have a stack of them. I've been handing them out to government biosecurity personnel working in diagnostic labs, just so they have them on hand as a reference. If you work in a diagnostic lab and you would like one of these psyllids in resin, please feel free to reach out to me. Going forward, I'll make this quick. We'll be continuing with our stakeholder engagement. We want to get a bit more strategic in Southern Australia with the education aspect. So Jackie is developing a workshop on identification of endemic and exotic citrus pests. We'll be continuing recruitment of trappers, particularly targeting those areas where we have low trapper numbers. We'll be continuing to try and value add to the early detector network by giving them more resources and chances to sit on webinars and such. And we're going to continue building those relationships with local councils and other knowledge broker organisations to try and make sure we get the word out about the program and about the risk to the citrus industry. And now that we've done quite a lot of awareness raising with the citrus industry, we're going to go into action planning mode. So what will the industry do if there is an incursion? So I'd just like to acknowledge we have worked with many people throughout the program. You all know who you are. New South Wales Department of Primary Industries has been a huge supporter of the program, so we'd like to thank them. And I will leave it there because we now have just a couple of minutes to field some questions.